Hey everybody, it's Rob over at Treehouse Recovery, and today I'm going to give you guys a video on relapse prevention. And I'm not referring to traditional relapse prevention or what we might call traditional relapse prevention tools. They do serve a purpose, they can be effective, but the problem is if a brain that has gone through a state of healing and becomes well and starts operating at a normal level, if it starts to slip back to old and addictive and compulsive behaviors, what will eventually happen is it can no longer access those tools. Now, I'll go into those tools in another video, but today I'm really gonna focus on what true relapse prevention looks like and how to maintain that. Before we actually jump into that, I wanna define what a relapse is. I wanna ask a question. Can somebody ingest mood-altering substances and it not be considered a relapse? And if this person is in recovery, of course. So, yes, that can happen. Let's say, for example, I'm walking down the street and I get hit by a car. Tragic, right? So I get hit by a car and I end up in the emergency room at the local hospital with a morphine drip. Now, there is a psychoactive substance going directly into my bloodstream, but that would not be considered a relapse because the motive and intent behind the substance entering my bloodstream isn't the escapism, isn't the euphoria, isn't the high. What it is something outside of my control led me into a situation to where I'm now receiving a morphine drip. Now, let's say, for example, at some point, maybe I'm engaging in addictive and compulsive behaviors. If you refer back to the cycle of craving, if my brain starts going back to that survival and limbic state of mind, associating the drugs with survival, and then I go out and use, that would be a relapse. So two scenarios, in both situations, there is a use, but the motive and intent behind the use is completely different. And if somebody in recovery were to wake up in a hospital with a morphine drip, the brain is operating in a healthy way, they would reach out to maybe a sponsor or a support group network, or they would start to use their tools. They would jump into action knowing that there is something going on chemically due to the morphine drip. So what I have highlighted by explaining what a relapse consists of gives us opportunities. There's hope. Okay? Relapse isn't just gonna come out and get you. There's steps that are gonna happen, making relapse a predictable process. Again, referring back to the cycle of craving, the brain needs to start to go back to an addictive and diseased state before that brain is willing to compromise itself and ingest poison. Drugs are poison for somebody in recovery. Before somebody's actually gonna ingest drugs or alcohol, they're going to start to maybe stop slacking in the recovery program. They're going to start to engage in various behaviors that they know do not support a healthy lifestyle. And because of that, there's opportunities to stop a relapse before it happens. In true relapse prevention, we discuss the BioPsychoSocial Spiritual Model. But before we even get into that, I'm going to explain how those four dimensions are compromised before active addiction and during active addiction. For starters, I'm going to talk about the bio, or our biology, which is a couple different things. It's our physical body, it's also our brain. A long time ago, before we had all the science and the research and the access to technology, when we looked at addiction, we would assume that it was a genetic disease and that there was a addict gene that would get passed down from generation to generation. And of course, we came to this conclusion because we didn't have the science. We would look at somebody's family tree and we'd see there's grandpa who's alcoholic and his son is also alcoholic. And then his son, grandson, he's shooting heroin. So we look at this family tree and come to the conclusion that there must be some male dominant addict gene that's just getting passed through the generation. what we began to learn later on was there actually isn't an addict gene, and that's not how genes work. But what we did find is there is something called a reward deficiency syndrome, which is very common in people who have the disease of addiction. And what this means is this person is unable to produce the same amount of reward as somebody that we would deem normal. So they will look out for various things to try to boost that reward, whether that be intense physical activity, pushing themselves to the limit, or drugs. Drugs will produce more reward in that brain. And during active addiction, that brain becomes hijacked through constant reward being created by external sources. The other part of biology is our physical being. And while we're in active addiction, we're probably not taking care of our bodies. Whether it's a lack of physical exercise, if it's poor nutrition or not eating at all. It could even be simple things like not grooming yourself or even brushing your teeth. These things are usually going to get neglected while somebody is in active addiction. The psycho or psychology is going to be a makeup of our mind, our thinking, pretty much irrational and self-defeating belief systems that will lead to low self-esteem, a lack of confidence, and it's a mind that isn't working the way it should be working. And all of those things are going to usually be impaired before active addiction starts and then reinforced during active addiction. The third component is going to be social. Before active addiction, we're usually going to be surrounded by people who are neglecting us or abusing us, pretty much unhealthy people. And these are usually going to be caregivers or family members. And later on in life, it's going to probably be our peer group. And if we're already predisposed for addiction, we're probably not going to surround ourselves with like-minded, healthy people. What happens is we're going to want to surround ourselves with unhealthy people. Maybe that's toxic relationships. Maybe that's other people that's using. Maybe it's just other people that are neglecting their overall health and well-being. Or we might be completely isolated. And there's also situations where we could be surrounded by a lot of people, but we feel that sense of isolation. And that's also going to contribute to that social factor. The fourth piece is going to be spirituality. Now, spirituality can be connected to religion, but it doesn't have to be. If your spirituality is something like Mother Nature or connection or whatever it might be, because spirituality can pretty much be anything based on somebody's relationship to it, you're probably not going to be practicing that while in active addiction. So if it is connected to religion, while in active addiction, you're probably not following through with a religious practice that supports your overall well-being. Also, when it comes to spirituality, we can form a moral compass that we need to follow through with. And active addiction, we're probably not going to be honoring our moral compass. So now that I've explained how the bio, psycho, social, spiritual, how those four dimensions are compromised before active addiction and during active addiction, I'm going to get into true relapse prevention. So we got the bio, the psycho, the social, the spiritual, and how through a proper recovery program, somebody will address these four dimensions and be able to maintain these four dimensions. The bio, the biology. For starters, brain chemistry. When somebody is in early sobriety, for lack of better terms, their chemistry is out of whack. So they're going to have a dopamine deficit. Endorphins aren't firing correctly. There's a lot of neuro pathways that have been compromised before active addiction and during active addiction. This can be addressed through things like pharmacology, but also intense physical activity. So by exerting the physical body, we are able to have a connection between this and this, which means we're going to be able to kickstart natural dopamine production. We're going to be able to get these neurotransmitters regulated and working the way they're supposed to be working. Also, with intense physical activity, somebody is going to start to feel better about themselves. It's going to boost self-esteem. And just the act of taking care of themselves through physical activity, but also getting haircuts, brushing their teeth. All of this is going to contribute to that biology piece of the four dimensions. The psycho, the psychology, somebody's thinking. Whether it's early sobriety, mid-sobriety, later on in sobriety, there are going to be irrational and self-defeating belief systems that are going to be present. And through therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, DBT, writing therapy, there's a lot of different modalities and interventions that can help somebody to understand their past, to understand why they think a certain way, and then to incorporate treatment tools and strategies to address the symptoms as they arise. And social. Once somebody enters a recovery program or some kind of new way of healthy living, it's essential that they start to surround themselves by like-minded people. Other people that are in recovery usually work well. There can be accountability, there can be a brotherhood or a sisterhood, there can be just the act of healing together and growing together will build these social bonds that can last, during the recovery process, but usually it's going to last a lifetime. And through those relationships, there can also be a sense of community and belonging. And all of these are essential for somebody to feel good about themselves. Now, the spiritual piece, I've seen many people seek out spirituality in recovery. It might be brand new to them, or they get to reinvest into a sense of spirituality that they've had in the past. It can be a huge supportive component in their recovery. So maybe they seek out religion and they've never even thought about religion before, or they create that connection to Mother Nature, like I was saying before, and that's their sense of spirituality. Or even just belonging in a group of people, that's their sense of spirituality. And I also talked about the moral compass. If somebody is honoring themselves and honoring their recovery and the people around them, they will really be able to fine-tune their moral compass. And with that, by following through with their moral compass, and of course, people are human, so there will be mistakes, but the opportunity to recognize when mistakes are made and to change it and to learn from that, that can really be somebody's sense of spirituality. Now, in this model, the BioPsychoSocial Spiritual Model, you could probably see how there's overlap. So, if somebody is addressing their biology through intense physical activity, let's say they're going to CrossFit, this is going to address brain chemistry, physical body, but it could also be a form of connection. Maybe they're doing it together. Or with that, they're also receiving a sense of spirituality. And by working out, they're also building self-esteem. So something as simple as a guy or a girl going to CrossFit and working out can hit all four of these dimensions. And this can happen in a recovery program, but it's essential that somebody take what they learn and invent what their maintenance program looks like. And that's true relapse prevention. If somebody is able to define what these look like, follow through with them, then this brain is going to start to get healthy. Relapse is all about an unhealthy brain. So if the brain heals, somebody starts to feel good about themselves, they start to feel connected, and they start to feel that sense of spirituality, they're not going to relapse. They're going to be able to work through pause, address symptoms, and then pretty much live their life. And as long as they are maintaining healthy living through the four dimensions, the idea of a relapse, it'll be laughable. Why would somebody want to mess up such a good thing that they have going on? And I want to end with this. Relapse versus a lapse. Now, I have heard and I have been told that a lapse is a quick use. Somebody maybe goes out and has a couple of drinks, or they go out and they use their drug of choice, and through divine intervention or maybe a family intervention or something, the universe stops it, which is rare, but the universe is able to stop it, and it's a quick use. I have heard that that is considered a lapse. That's not the case. That's not a lapse. That is a relapse. Anytime somebody, again, motive and intent behind the use, ingest drugs or alcohol and they're in recovery, that is a relapse. I don't care if it's one beer and it's one time, that is still a relapse. The idea that that is a lapse is actually very harmful, because if somebody in early recovery hears that, then they can then go out there and test the water And like I've said, usually it's not going to be just one time. It's going to be multiple times, and it can be very devastating on that individual's life. So what a lapse really is, and referring back to this model, a lapse is any time these have been compromised. So one or two of these at some point might get compromised, which is normal. Again, healthy operating brain is going to be able to recognize this and do something in the moment to correct it. But let's say somebody stops working out, or they stop therapy and they're not ready to do that. This would be considered a lapse. They're getting closer. Like I've said before, relapse is a predictable process. If somebody is starting to do this and then maybe cutting out their their peer group, and they're not talking to them, not telling them, hey, I stopped working out. Hey, I stopped going to my therapist, and they are now in a situation, and this will get compromised too, where they're getting very close to a relapse. But something could be done about it. And sometimes this happens outside of our control. Let's say somebody is very much invested in physical activity, and that's part of the recovery program. And, well, they break their leg. This now becomes much smaller, which means they now need to double down on something like this. And as that happens, they're able to heal the physical body, but still maintain their overall recovery. So through the 4 dimensions, it's not always going to be 25, 25, 25, 25, but it's going to shift and move based on what's going on with that individual's life. So when these dimensions, 1 or 2 of them, becomes compromised, that is a lapse. And it gets them closer to what a true relapse is. So I hope that education through the 4 dimensions of well-being has been helpful to understand that relapse prevention exists in the 4 dimensions of well-being. And by maintaining the 4 dimensions of well-being, after that brain is properly healed, is how somebody can avoid a relapse. This is Rob at Treehouse Recovery. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to watch other videos, check out the link below, and I'll see you next time.